David Spencer. He's the head of crime and justice at the Policy Exchange, a very good think tank indeed, and the former Met Detective Chief Inspector. Hello, David. How are you?
Good afternoon, Jonathan. Good to see you.
I'm good, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us, because this is an amazing story. I'm quite baffled, so maybe I'm wrong. So please do tell me, David, if I am so, which is, so Mark Rowley is basically begging the government to legislate in order for him to be able to tell police officers to stop policing tweets and police the streets instead. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Surely that decision can be made by a police commander or a chief inspector, or a chief constable, sorry, as Sir Mark Rowley is, and he can just simply tell his troops on the ground, unless there is serious terrorism, a serious threat to life, or indeed stalking and harassment online by, you know, some vile man towards a woman potentially happening online, use your common sense. Deal with knife crime, deal with theft from shops, deal with phone robberies, deal with antisocial behaviour. That's where the public need to see you. That's what they pay their taxes for. Do we need another law?
Well, you're broadly correct here. Police officers and police chiefs in particular have broad discretion as to what it is their officers focus their time and energy on. So we've seen that time and again through the debates on what's called police operational independence. We've seen it through court cases and various other things. Essentially, chief constables have wide discretion as to what their officers focus their time and energy on. And the reality is, as you've said, and indeed ministers have been saying, and Policy Exchange have said in recent times, ultimately what policing needs to be doing is focusing on policing the streets rather than policing tweets. And that's absolutely right. And the reality is, this is what we know the public want to see happen as well. So Policy Exchange did some research earlier this year looking at public attitudes towards policing and crime, and what they overwhelmingly say is that the police need to focus on a tougher approach to crime and to criminals. And what they mean is knife crime, people who are out robbing the members of the public, people out doing burglaries, shoplifting, those sorts of things. That is what the public want the police to be focused on time and again. Now, that's not to say that there aren't elements of the legislation around the Public Order Act, for example, that may well need to be tweaked around free speech provisions. It is sensible for the government to look at that. But the main issue here is actually how the police are choosing to go about their work.
Well, it is amazing, isn't it? As you say, sorry, I'm just flabbergasted that Sir Mark Rowley just wants more legislation. In fact, in my time in Parliament, what I learnt was that there was too much legislation that constantly kept confusion about which laws did what and where was their overlap, and it meant judicial reviews were becoming more and more common because the law was actually gaining more uncertainty rather than actually what governments, I think, should be doing, which is slimming down legislation, updating legislation, merging legislation where necessary. I mean, this surely is just going to look like Sir Mark Rowley's passing the buck, isn't it?
I think that's a fair assessment. And indeed, we at Policy Exchange wrote about that just last week, in fact. And the thing is, this is a tactic that we see from senior people in the police all the time. And we particularly see it around protest, for example. So yeah. Particularly around Parliament Square, there's a huge amount of legislation that is designed to protect our elected representatives, elected governments, to be able to go about their work. Time and again, we've seen, unfortunately, the police not necessarily enforcing the law in the way they could do around Parliament. And as a result, we see some of the ridiculous scenes with our elected representatives being impeded from going about their duties. And the reality is, again, this comes down to a choice by the police and by police commanders. And the reality is they already have, in the main, the powers that they need from Parliament. This is about how they choose to go about their work day to day.
Absolutely, indeed. And there's another story that has also caused a lot of outrage. I think The Sun doing great work in uncovering the fact that Sir Robert J., a judge, has sparked fury when he sympathised with Al-Qaeda fiend Haroon Aswat 50, who will be released from hospital to Yorkshire. Despite police fears, he remains a threat. The reason he is an important individual is because he had a mastermind role in the 7/7 bombings, which saw, in 2005, innocent men, women and children maimed or indeed murdered by those terrorist atrocities on the streets of London, attacks on tubes and on buses. He has served all his jail time and is due to be released to his family in Batley, West Yorkshire, at a date yet to be announced. He confessed to the 2005 London outrage and the role in the 9/11 atrocity in 2001. But he is set to be freed without ankle tag monitoring because of a loophole which forbids checks on psychiatric payments. And Aswat, who was threatening to kill Christians, Jews and Muslim enemies as recently as 2022, will walk free with the warm wishes of Justice J. Nigel Farage has come out, leader of Reform UK, calling the judge to be sacked, and Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick has said the Pally remarks were an insult to the 52 people who died in 2005. It's quite a jaw-dropping thing to be said, where I think he said, here we go, the legal submission in the 65-year-old judge asked, Mr. Aswat, is there anything you'd like to say? How are you feeling? I'm good. Mr. Justice J, okay. You feel stable on your treatment? Aswat, yes. When you're released, you're going to go back to your family, I think, in Yorkshire? Yes. Mr. J, okay, and you understand what these requirements are. I have read through all the paperwork. Yes, okay, you probably want to put all this behind you now. Indeed, I do. Mr. Justice J, it could not have been too pleasant being in American custody all that time. I mean, what's going on? This is ridiculous.
Well, I, like you and many others, struggle to find any sympathy for this man's time in custody, whether it's in the UK or the United States. And I'm quite sure that the victims and the families of those who died on 7/7 will probably feel very similar. I think there's a real concern here. The reality is that these most serious offenders, whether they're terrorists or others, there's a real question about whether these people should ever be allowed to be walking back on our streets. And certainly I'd be deeply concerned about this person not being in some form of custody for the rest of their life, potentially. I think certainly terrorists and very, very serious criminals, we need to look at how we're dealing with these people in terms of the amount of time they're spending behind bars and, if necessary, for the rest of their lives. In relation to the judge himself that made this, it just seems utterly bizarre. And you've got to really wonder whose side various public servants are on when you hear these sorts of comments. It's a very, very strange comment for a judge to have made.
There's such serious mistrust, disunity in this country when it comes to our judiciary, when it comes to our police, mainly because of those in authority. I mean, leaders in those sectors. I don't ever attack cops who patrol the streets. I think they're just following the orders of their superiors. And with judges in these very privileged positions, doing things like that just further undermines credibility and really risks a very important part of our democracy, which is an independent judiciary which we trust and believe that they apply the law without any prejudice or personal views. Another one here, obviously almost 900 arrests at Pro-Palestine Action protest in London. This is people who were protesting against the prescription of Palestine Action, a terrorist organisation, as now they are, just prescribed, who obviously broke onto that MOD base and attacked the aircraft, causing millions of pounds worth of damage and undermining the security of this nation. I obviously, as you can tell, David, have no qualms with all these arrests going on. I think that those people who broke onto that military base were fortunate not to be shot on sight for entering illegally onto a military base. I mean, this is obviously taking up, however, a lot of police time. These continued mass demonstrations on the streets of London will drag cops out of other areas into London. Do you think it's time that, serious action's taken? First of all, is it right that the police are arresting these people? Did the government maybe overstep, some people would argue here, in prescribing Palestine Action? Or is it time just to ban these hate marches, I would call them, David, personally, altogether, so that the cops from other areas aren't being dragged into police London?
Well, first things first, let me be clear that I think that the way that the police have approached these protests in relation to Palestine Action and the large numbers of arrests, I think the Metropolitan Police have done an excellent job here. The reality is Palestine Action is a prescribed terrorist organisation, and as is very clear in the legislation, expressing support for a terrorist organisation is unlawful, and the police are absolutely right to be making these arrests, and I commend the Metropolitan Police for doing so. In relation to this organisation themselves, I think we need to remember there's not only incidents such as the one that you talk about where they broke onto an RAF base, there are other incidents where, for example, police officers have been very seriously injured, and this is a group, let us not let's not be in any doubt, who are seeking to influence government and intimidate the public or sections of the public and to advance a political cause. And that very, very clearly comes under Section 1 of the Terrorism Act 2000. So I think the police absolutely took the right action here, and they should continue doing so as long as this carries on. In terms of whether the marches should continue, well, the legislation actually it's pretty difficult to prevent a march completely under the legislation. But actually what we have seen is the police taking increasing steps to restrict protests to places where they will not disrupt Parliament and not disrupt people going about their lives. And certainly on those occasions when the police have done so, they've done an excellent job. And I think we probably need to see more of that than we've seen over the last couple of years to date.
Well, look, David Spencer, the head of crime and justice at the Policy Exchange and former Met Detective Chief Inspector, thank you so much for joining us today.